You join me back at the desk, and I am fighting with tiny chrome pieces. Here are some little carburetor trumpet things, and they have little bits of sprue on them. They're so small I can't hold them in my hand to take the little bits of sprue off, and because they're chromed they're so slippery when I try and hold them with anything else they ping off. So I don't really know how I'm going to deal with that just yet. I did get the other chrome bits on the motor for the motorbike, and that went okay. I did have to file down the long straight section on the carburetor setup here because it was sticking out too far, looked a bit weird. But other than that, the fit's okay for what these pieces are. Usually you leave the chrome tool last after you've painted everything, but looking at the way all of this goes together, I can get to everything with the chrome on, and it's just going to be easier if this is in one piece. But these little tiny trumpet things down here are supposed to glue onto the end of each one of these. Why they couldn't just cast them in one piece, I have no idea. That would have made my life a lot easier. Other things, like the exhaust pipes, they've needed quite a lot of trimming back. There's been quite a lot of flashing, and because they're chromed, it always looks terrible. So I'm going to have to do quite a bit of repainting on these just to get them looking nice again. No big deal, there's a few bits and pieces like that I've got to do that with. And just at the moment, on the front forks here, I've just got the headlight gluing in place, and that's a devil of a thing to get lined up straight. I still have one more little bit of sprue on there to remove, and then we can think about assembling this part of the bike. The trouble is, there's a lot of fiddly work that I can't really film because I'm in the way of the camera as I'm doing it, and all of this chrome stuff I really have to concentrate. I don't want to ping it off into the ether. While we wait for those things to dry though, I can have a look at what's in my bag here, which is the components of the bike, and start putting it together. And again, I had to modify things. The rear wheel, for example, has an axle moulded in, and if you leave the axle the standard width, the bit in the middle here, you can't close up the two halves of the body, which isn't great. There was a lot of flashing on this body as well. Perhaps the biggest problem with the bike is how fragile it all is and how spindly, because I've got to paint these bits that go into it before I can stick it together and paint it, because once I glue this I'm going to have a really visible seam down the middle, which I'm going to have to clean off before I paint. So working out the sub-assemblies on this one and what bits to do and what bits to leave is proving challenging. I've since learned that apparently this is a problem with these old MPC kits, is these smaller parts like this can be a nightmare, and that's why you don't often see them built. You often see just the car and none of the accessories. And I can well understand why after working on this one. I had a bit of a dry fit of things and realised that there's enough flex in these pieces that I can get the wheel in location. I'm not going to do it right now because this glue is still wet. So I've glued the two halves together and noticed there's quite a few alignment issues. So everything is glued. I can't really clamp any of it because it's too tiny to do that and too fragile. So I'm just going to have to wait for it to dry and then file all of my surfaces to get everything the shape they should be. And then I can hopefully think about getting this painted, which I shall have to do by hand. It's too small and fiddly to do with any kind of spray can. Obviously I don't have an airbrush. We'll just have to set that aside and wait. In the meantime, I can do the wheels. This little thing here is the stand for the motorbike. And yeah, I still haven't figured out what to do with things like this, which the camera is struggling to see. That is the fuel cap off the petrol tank for the bike, and it is minuscule. I don't like this bit of the kit. I shall be honest. I'm doing the tyre first because if I get the black on the colour I use for the wheels, I shall be very cross. I nearly did white walls on these. I was very tempted until I thought about it and realised that for what this is going to be and the time period I think it's going to be sort of set in, white walls would have been well out of fashion, and you know, it wouldn't have been something you would have done on your 1970s chopper. It's more of a 60s thing. So we'll stick with black walls. That's also slightly easier for me because actually doing white walls on stuff, even when it's marked, is very challenging when you're doing it in paint rather than as a plastic insert as some models have. While I wait for those tyres to dry, time to do the engine work. And again, I'm just starting with non-shiny bits because then it's easier to do the shiny bits afterwards. This gives you the first glimpse at the colour I'm thinking of doing everything. I want to try and keep everything very 1980s looking, but actual 1980s looking, not pretend Instagram 1980s looking, because it didn't look like people think it looked like. It mostly looked beige, actually. As anybody who lived through it knows. Just a nice dark red, which we'll do as a base coat. And since I've got this out on the palette, even though I've not trimmed all of this back yet, I'm just going to put a base coat on it. It will speed things up for me later. And it'll allow me to see the imperfections a bit better. We'll wait for that to dry before we can do the next stage. I think there's going to be a lot of this, a lot of waiting for things to dry, tidying up and going back. These are handy. They're just the Citadel ones, and it turns out they hold these wheels okay. I'm going to go for a very classic 80s colour combo of a dark gold with that dark red. I think that will look quite good. Probably should have used these little holders when I did the tyres. Probably would have made my life a lot easier. I'll know for next time. And I blobbed a little bit on the black tyre. So much for my lovely brush control. Sometimes it's not as good as I would like it to be. Now these little holders that I'm using, the tops here are spring loaded. show you on this spare one. So you can pull them open like this, and the idea is when you've got the wargaming bases you can just clamp them in there. Turns out the older style, which are these chunkier ones, fit the big wheel, and the newer style, which I don't get on with these as well, I don't find them as comfortable, but that does hold this one because this wheel doesn't stay put in there. But that's the nice thing with a lot of the modelling stuff, is you can just use whatever you need to use to get the job done. You don't need to buy stuff that's specifically for one job and only use it for that job. You can always use it for whatever job it works for. Once again, just made a mess of that. It's really difficult because when I'm doing the spokes on this, the way it's cast, it makes the bristles on the brush explode out as you're painting it, and there's not a lot I can do about that. It's just the shape of the piece I'm painting. So many fiddly, annoying little pieces. These are the front forks off the motorbike. When it focuses, there we go. And I've not done much here. I've just done the back of the headlight in that dark red to match the rest of the frame. Mostly because I had to do some filing where the sprue was, and it took a lot of the chrome off. But also, an 80s thing was body coloured accessories. So it just felt appropriate. Done the handle grips in black, and I'll probably do a little bit of pin washing on this just to bring some of the details out when everything's put together. We'll see what it looks like, I'm not sure yet. The motor is pretty much done. Again, apart from some light washing, I've got to do the cover on the top here in chrome rather than the grey primer, but the main body is in that dark red and the base is in a nice sort of aluminium colour. I still have to figure out how to do those fiddly little chrome pieces that stick on here. Not figured that one out yet, not enjoying that bit. Other items, of course, are the wheels. These are finished. I really like this particular gold. It's just the right sort of look for this era. So I think that's going to look a treat when that's together. And I did some small detailing on the frame. So the chain there and the sprocket is in silver, and on this side the brake, and I think this is to do with the brake mechanism. I'm not very good with motorbikes, so I'm not sure. The other thing I wanted to show you was just how much I've had to sand and file this to get a somewhat even finish. You can see with how much paint's missing there, it needed a lot of work. And it's not perfect. I'm going to just have to accept that this is a flawed casting and work with what I've got. It's not great. Now, one of the things that is a little bit awkward is when you put the forks in, which I now can't do. This piece here, which you can barely see, slides into this piece here, but when I've glued it, the hole that runs through there has closed up a bit, so I need to drill that hole out so that I can put the chrome piece in and get all the forks together on this, because I do want to keep the forks mobile on it if I can. It is an option in the way you build it, but yeah. Okay, we are getting there, but this is just horrible. I got a bit creative with the fuel tank here because I cannot tidy this up without far too much work. So I just did some freehanding in black on the top and just a black edge on there, and that'll be enough just to hide the really bad moulding that's on this. The next problem I had was the motor. It doesn't actually fit the way that the instructions suggest it should. I've had to take the head, I assume this is the head, off the main block of the engine so I can get the block into the frame and then wiggle the head in, but then the carburetors up here, they're at completely the wrong angle and they foul on the fuel tank. So I don't really know how I'm going to get those in, and these tiny little nubbins over here that are supposed to go on the end of these. It's a challenge, to say the least. So I can't actually fully assemble the engine out of the bike as I was expecting to. I'm going to have to do this weird partial construction thing. But I'm happy with this section so far, and I can at least put the back wheel on it now. All the paint on this at the moment is very, very delicate until I get some varnish on, which will be my next stage. So it's very, very easy to chip and scratch things. I'm just touching a few bits up here. Right, that's the back together. I'm going to give this a varnish because I need to protect this. The next stages are going to require a lot of handling. And I'm going to have to figure out what on earth I'm doing with this engine that's going in it because it is such a pain. I have reached the end of my patience with this for now. Obviously for you it's not going to be very long. For me it might be tomorrow. I have got some varnish on everything to protect the paint, and I do like the colour combination. That works really, really well. Got the little fuel filler cap on here and had a mishap with the super glue, which I'm hoping doesn't mess everything up, but if it does we'll fix that later. I've dry fit the front forks, and yep, that all seems okay. It's very delicate, it's very fiddly, but to fit these into the bike I first have to fit this section because that little bit goes up into the frame, and then you have to glue that section on top, and then you have to touch up all the chrome. The engine, yeah, I need a bit more patience available to be able to finish this particular section off. It is a pain. And I've also had a look at the exhausts that come off this, and they're also incredibly difficult to figure out how to get lined up with everything. Sometimes when you're building a kit like this you need to step away from it a bit and just do a little bit until your patience runs out. If I force this right now I'm going to make some stupid mistakes and I'm going to break some things. So I'm not going to force it. I'm back. I figured out how to do these horrible little chrome things. This is just an old tile. I use this as my painting palette, and hopefully my fingertip and this craft knife blade here is giving you some sense of scale. It's absurd. I have one little remnant of sprue to take off on this side, and I found how to do it is very carefully lock it in place with your fingernail, and then do your best to trim off the excess like that. It does leave a little bit on the edge, but I think I can file that when this is glued on. So my next challenge is I need to take the chrome off the back here so I can actually glue it onto the carburetors. With the help of some tweezers, it is all together. So these tiny little pieces here, I don't understand why this isn't cast in one piece, because, well, it could have been. Like, this whole section could have been one piece, but instead it's the red section there, this chrome section, and then each one of these trumpets individually cast. What a nightmare. I have to let the glue dry here, but I'm hoping after we've done that I can clean off these very last few remnants of sprue on the end of the trumpets there. It might be easier with everything glued together like this. Here's hoping. I do have some chrome paint to do on the cover here, and obviously to touch up where I filed back the chrome here. So I'll have to do all of that before this goes into the bike. We have a new problem with the fit on this kit. I've drilled out as far as I dare the socket in the frame here, and I've slimmed down the chrome piece as much as I dare before it snaps off, and I still have a gap. Because nothing on this bike fits properly. But I also have this section of sprue, and it has just a little piece here which I've been busy filing away, and I can drop that in that gap there. So I shall glue that, file off the excess, repaint that section because you can see it when everything's put together, and hopefully that will fix that little problem. The alternative would be to glue the forks in one fixed position and then fill this. That might have been slightly easier, but I want to keep what functionality I can on this kit that's actually modelled into it. Part of the fun challenge with trying to build a kit like this. Here we are, this is as good as I can get these little trumpets. I've tried filing those extra bits off several times, and the glue connection is very, very fragile on that. Sometimes you just have to accept things aren't going to get any better. That's one of those cases there. The better success is with the forks. So you can still actually move this bit. And the little insert that I put in there has worked. So I'm going to touch that in with some fresh paint now, so it doesn't look quite so bad. Fortunately, this bit is mostly hidden when the forks are put together, so I'm not too worried about absolute perfection here. Next job is to actually build the forks. So we have that bit that slots in there, and you don't want to glue this central peg because that piece drops on top, and that has two glue points at the top here and two glue points down here, and that holds all of that into the mechanism. Then I can look at finishing the chrome work on this and getting this installed, but I do have another fitment problem, which is that the block of the engine here is at not quite the right angle, and of course I've glued it in. So I'm going to have to figure out how to get everything fitting together. I would really like to say that this build is going well. It is not. This side, the exhaust pipes were an absolute pain to get lined up. I've had to use super glue, which I hate doing on plastic kits. It was the only way to get everything to hold in place. I've clipped the little bike stand on underneath as well, just to make it easier for me to hold things. This side, well, that's a different story, because I got the longer pipe on, but the shorter one, as you can see, has snapped. Because I was trying to line everything up, it's all so fragile and flimsy, yeah, I basically couldn't. So the bike is almost finished now, but I have to do this bit of repair work, I have to touch up a bunch of paint, and if I had one recommendation with this kit, it's do not build the bike. It is a nightmare, and I haven't really enjoyed doing it very much. But it does look good, so maybe it'll be worth it in the end. The trailer got some additional attention. You can see there's two sticky up bits here, and these hold the bike. sort of. The trouble is, they're not the right length. One of them is too short. I hadn't trimmed it down. I actually took it off the sprue full length, and one of them is just too small out the box. They also have almost no contact area on the trailer to stick down to, so they're a real nuisance to attach. I just have to finish painting those so they match everything else. But not a fan of this particular bit of the build. I will be very happy when we move on to doing the car in a future episode. I'm going to fiddle about and finish this off, and we're just going to go straight to the glamour shots. There is no point me trying to film any more of this fiddly, annoying work. I think you should just enjoy the end result of my struggle.